We're back with another exciting episode of The Missing Link in Your Healing. And this is a topic that very much has reflected my whole life journey, but especially my recent journey with my body, mind, and spirit. And Loretta and I will talk about this a bit more, but I have been having some allergic reactions. And this was a topic we were always going to do. It was on our list, but the timing couldn't have been better because it's one of the things I'm needing to address and work with as part of a big part of healing my allergy to sulfur. So I'm going to kick off, and then Loretta's going to butt in. I am going to paraphrase a bit of stuff from Gabor Mate from his book, When the Body Says No. Put the name of the book in the show notes. I highly recommend it if you want information about this stuff and his patient case studies he cites. He does not give practical tools on how to deal with it. So that's the wonderful integration we bring, Loretta and I, is the information. But information without tools is just knowledge. So we are trying to bring you both. And I think that's gold. So Gabor Mate says, and this is a psychoneuroimmunology thing, it's quite a well-researched thing now, it's getting out there more and more, that in the final analysis, disease is a boundary question or a boundary issue. And boundaries and autonomy within oneself are essential for health. Now that might sound quite academic, but I'm just going to carry on a little bit with the information and we will unpack it in a simple way. So illness not only has a history, but it tells a history. It is the culmination of a lifelong history of struggle for self. And this most certainly has been and still is my journey. That's why I read all these books and I can talk about them. So from a simple biological perspective, in terms of our physicality, our bodies, it would appear, and it's put out there, that our survival as a physical organism is the ultimate goal of us being here. But it would seem, however, that the existence of an autonomous self regulating one's psyche, one's psychological self, the unconscious stuff, is actually nature's highest purpose for us. And I think I know the body is bringing us to that truth over and over again. Because when the body says no, it's usually telling us something that's on this level, a psychological, spiritual, emotional level. It's not the only part of healing, as we say, and the disclaimer we need to continuously make is this is a reflection of part of the healing journey. And for me, it's been absolutely massive. And it can be, for some people, a very big focus of their healing. But it is the part of physical healing that isn't out there that much. So we want to bring it to you. Mind and spirit can survive grievous physical injury. Mind and spirit can survive grievous physical energy. But repeatedly, Mate says, we see the physical body succumbs, it breaks down, it gets sick when psychic integrity, psychological integrity, and freedom are jeopardized. And I think most of us don't really know what that means. So we'll be talking about that on and on in various episodes in various ways. In the final analysis, disease is a boundary issue, as I said. When we look into the research that predicts who's likely to get ill, Pia and I and people like Mate are finding that the people at the greatest risk are those who have experienced the most severe boundary invasions before they were able to construct an autonomous sense of self. So when they were children or in utero. In a 1998 American Journal of Preventative Medicine published the results of adverse childhood experiences, and this kind of research is being done more and more and put out there. They researched with 9,500 adults and found that childhood stresses such as emotional abuse, sexual abuse, violence, drug abuse, or mental illness in the family were highly correlated with risk behaviors, health outcomes, and death. So there's a strong relationship between the dysfunction in a family of origin and adult health. The greater the exposure to dysfunction in childhood, the worse the health status was in adults, and the greater the chances of dying from cancer, heart disease, injury, or other causes. Now, that might just sound very theoretical to you, but if you really listen to that, we're not saying parenting is wrong, because people parent from their own place and they do their best. But in many situations with many people, it's just unknown, unseen, undealt with. And I was one of them. If a child does not have an opportunity to assert themselves openly and honestly when they're children, then later on in life, they start having all kinds of weird unconscious things going on, not being able to draw boundaries within themselves and with others, resistance towards things, including physical health. Loretta?
Sorry, I just want to, this is a quick interruption. I'm going to really try and make it quick. I just want to say, just in terms of, those health outcomes that people who've had what is called capital T trauma, drug abuse, sexual abuse, mental illness in the family, those capital T traumas, they are at increased risk. But even if you haven't had capital T trauma, based on what Antoinette has just said, you can be what looks like super lovingly parented with a parent that smothered you with affection and did everything for you. You still are unable under those circumstances to express yourself in an autonomous way, which is why people who come from, shall we say, less dysfunctional families also get sick. So this is not just, it's just that it correlates more. So the statistics show that if you've had capital T trauma, you have an increased risk. But this doesn't mean that if you've only had what we'll call small T trauma, an inability to assert yourself because your mom was so kind, she did everything for you, and so you didn't want to be defiant and you didn't want to say no, and you didn't ever get a chance to be who you really were because you didn't want to hurt her feelings or you didn't want to upset her. That is also an inability to express yourself freely and be who you really are. So sometimes too much kindness can lead to the same problem as too much cruelty. I just want to point that out so that we don't go, oh, well, I didn't have that kind of trauma, so why am I sick? That could be one question. Or I'm never going to get sick because I didn't have that kind of trauma. No.
Oh, brilliant, Loretta. Oh, thank you for that. That was such an important piece of the puzzle, because I think it's very common in the lives of children, and I notice it more in modern children, actually, that either we can't draw boundaries as children, but that boundaries are just not in place. They're not constructed in the first place. So, and that's because parents, there's all kind, we don't have to go into parenting now, but I think that people just don't realize that the blurring of these psychological boundaries in childhood becomes a significant source of physiological stress in us as adults. So,
100%.
Yeah, it's big, this. You're right. And you're right. It's not just people who have been traumatized.
And it can be something as simple as not allowing a child to make a choice for themselves, or not giving them options so that they can learn to choose. So something as simple as you choose what the snack is going to be. Now, I know as parents, we don't always have time to but you know what, not options. Some children really feel they get into their autonomous self when they feel like they are part of the decision about something that's important for their lives. And a lot of parents go, oh, but children are not capable of making those decisions. Well, I would argue, I mean, we could actually have one on childhood development, even though I'm not a childhood development specialist. But when parents have to draw clear boundaries, but you know what? It is still that child's life. Just because it's a child doesn't mean that it can't be a collaboration. And so either it's incredibly permissive and the child can do whatever they want, so there are no boundaries and they have no guidance, and that's problematic, or everything is done for you. But little things like, having the child decide, I don't know, we're in the sweet store, which sweet would you like? As opposed to, you can't have the red ones because they've got, I don't know, red dye, blah, 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 blah. Well, then don't take the child into the sweet store and don't give them the option. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay. So it can be very, very subtle. And just to add to the point again, that it doesn't have to be massive trauma, although massive trauma is definitely going to more obviously show this. So just in case anyone is parent has now thought that they were terrible parents and that they destroyed their kids, please, every parent does the best they can. Okay. I have a child, she's in therapy, nothing to be ashamed of. All right. So we give them the tools to help them so that they can recover from any of the dysfunctional parenting that we may have done because we didn't know any better.
I mean, everybody does their best, but it's just the nature of the human journey and the psyche and the developmental process is that, and people with indistinct personal boundaries when they become adults, which is not just from trauma, from what you're saying. If we have indistinct personal boundaries, it plays out in so many different ways. It can be anything from people pleasing to suppressing anger, to expressing anger in the wrong way, there are so many different ways that we, people who have problems with personal boundaries, internally and externally, we live with constant stress. So everything's constantly stressful because so I'm only learning now. I'm 63 and I've been 7 years into my healing, inside out healing journey from cancer, and I'm still finding myself having different levels of this coming and me needing to see it and deal with it because my body's telling me again something is out of alignment. So the thing is, when there's no clear boundaries between a child and a parent, or the boundaries aren't set, a whole enmeshment thing happens later on. And enmeshment is what the psychologists term as a way of connecting to the rest of the world. So our intimate relationships, our friendships, just the way we engage and connect. And it can take a number of different forms. We can be withdrawal and sullen. We can be self-defeating resistance to authority, compulsive caretaking of others, exceptionally domineering. For me, it's very like, I have an emotional reaction to everything because part of my journey has been to heal my borderline personality, as I've shared. And so the boundaries are so indistinct. I mean, I've got better and better. I've healed this a lot, but like, who actually am I? And what do I really need? And what can I say and can't I say? And such terror up until recently of pissing people off, and then they won't like me, but then getting really angry and doing it all in the wrong way. And so I'm learning to navigate like what is really me, and what do I really want to communicate, and what boundaries do I really want to draw. And recently Loretta pointed this out, because I'm having this allergy issue, is allergies are a boundary issue, and my boundaries I'm looking at the moment are mostly internal, like the boundaries I don't set or don't keep with myself. But Loretta and I are going to talk about that a bit more. So I'm going to hand over to Loretta, and I can see she's making notes. But boundaries and autonomy. So being autonomous enough, if that word, maybe people don't know what we mean, it's like you're okay enough within yourself and who you are to know what you want, where you can draw boundaries, to be able to say it without explosive anger or nastiness. So what I've done is been very people pleasing, and then my boundaries constantly get overstepped because I do too many things to help people and I don't protect myself. And then I get really furious when they, I don't know, they're not kind back to me or they overstep my boundaries. And I'm like, it took me a long time to realize this is my stuff. So, yeah, I'm needing to learn now another whole level of boundary because we experience life through our bodies. And if we are not able to articulate our life experience, or articulate our own needs or know our own boundaries, our bodies are going to speak what our minds and mouths cannot. And yeah, that's why my body's screaming at me again. So Loretta and I think, are going to do some online live coaching so you can see how she operates, because I know what's going on, but it's not always so simple to know what the next step is when you're on your own. So Loretta, the rest is yours.
Thanks, Antoinette. Yes, I am taking notes because I think of things and I don't want to interrupt. And then I'm like, what if I don't say this? Because, you know, so yes, you're right. I was taking notes. So I just want to go back to the why it's so difficult for us to be autonomous. So on the one hand, it is because we don't necessarily have clear boundaries from our parents, or the boundaries are blurred. But it's also because each adult, each human has a hierarchy. This is at the level of their egoic development, right? You know, if like you said to me, who are you, Loretta? I'd say, well, you know, I'm South African, I'm Caucasian, my father was Italian, my mother was an Afrikaner, I have brown eyes, I used to have brown hair, but no longer. Okay, and you know, I'm resilient and I don't give up and I'm independent and I'm quite a loner and I'm an introvert. Okay, all of those, the ways that we would describe ourselves, that's on our egoic reality. And we all have a hierarchy of things that are important to us. And so your parents have two different hierarchies of values. So values are not things like morals. I'm not talking about morals. I'm talking about your father may have had a high value on work and money. For example, your mother may have had a high value on learning and family and health and spirituality, for argument's sake, okay? And so what ends up happening is when people support our values, we warm up to them and we open up to them and we become inclusive. And when they challenge our values, we close down and we shut down and we reject them. So now imagine you're this new baby, right? You don't know anything about the world. This is like you're looking at it blank slate. So when you support inadvertently your mother or your father's values, they warm up, open up, and they're more accepting. When you challenge your parents, so, you know, when you're a teenager, right, and you challenge your parents shut down and they close down, they make more rules. So they try and control you more. So this happens inadvertently while we're little, tiny, between the ages of 0 and 3. And we confuse this with acceptance and love. So I'm going to make a statement that says all parents love their children and all children love their parents. If we could just take that as like the baseline. But whether your parent is behaving in a warm, supportive way towards you or in a cold, rejecting way towards you has got a lot to do with whether you are supporting or challenging their values. Now, how would you know what those are? That as we grow up, we start learning, okay, this is what's important to mum and this is what's important to dad, which is why when your kids get older, they know exactly which parent to ask for things. They know that if they ask their mother, she's going to say no, because they know what her values are. And so then they ask the father instead, right? Or other way around, you know, they know their dad's going to say no. So my daughter used to do that. Mommy, could you, because then I would have to like go, you know, I would say, sure, don't worry, I'll talk to daddy. I mean, that's typical. Lots of people do this. Okay, this is normal family dynamics. So this is one of the reasons why we automatically, we are not necessarily, it's like becoming, like knowing who you really are without the fear of being rejected is difficult. That's why I said right in the beginning, right? And it's much more difficult when you've got serious trauma involved. It is harder. There's no doubt about it. But it's part of the human condition. And it's so that we can, within our families, kick against the traces and possibly like test the boundaries so that we can learn who we are while not being rejected. Because when you do that in the real world, no one's obligated to love you, the world outside of your family. So that's just a sort of a contextual thing on why this actually can be difficult for people. So just that. So now let's just get to the health thing, right? So you've got two boundaries in the body. You have your external boundary, which is the boundary between you and the world, obviously, right? So when I touch you, Antoinette, we're putting our boundaries together, right? But we can't get beyond that physical boundary. Then you have an internal boundary, and the internal boundary is your gut. Starts in your mouth and ends in your anus. And in the lining of your large intestine, you have lymphatic tissue, which is another part of your internal boundary. So you have an external boundary and an internal boundary. So if we just look at allergies, most allergies express themselves as either difficulty breathing and mucus in the internal boundary, or hives and itching and skin reactions, and often both. So when you get that kind of reaction, it doesn't mean you do not have good boundaries. It may mean that you're in a situation where your boundaries are unclear. So this doesn't mean you are a person with no boundaries. So it doesn't mean that if Antoinette's having allergies, she has no boundaries. No, she's got boundaries. She may well just find herself in a life situation where her boundaries are no longer serving her. So sometimes at the interface of where we need to change, we develop symptoms so that it can actually help us ask the question. And the question is, well, where is this? And what does it mean? All right. And so that's what I've spent my whole career trying to unravel. And you know what? I haven't unraveled all of it, but it's like learning a language, eventually you start getting more and more proficient at it. So your deeply internal boundary beyond the lining of your gut is your lymphatic system. And your lymphatic system is part of your immune system, makes your white blood cells. It makes those fighter cells, the cells that basically is the breeding ground for your army. So if you think of your immune system as the army, it's your army, and you are the commanding officer of the army. So, when you say one thing and do another, your army's like, which way are we going? When you are unclear about what you need, what you require, who you are, your army, then you're unclear about the enemy. And then your army is, well, who is the enemy? And then your army starts going on high alert. And then stuff that was never the enemy before suddenly becomes the enemy. Or things that are not the enemy for many people suddenly become the enemy for your body. And so I'm just talking about allergies now, because that's one of the fundamental ways that we can see our immune system expressing. But when your immune system is rebelling, your question has got to, it is important, like, what is it rebelling against? Yes, because you can avoid the allergen. But if you're allergic to house dust mites, if you've ever had a child who was allergic to something like house dust mites, any parent of those children know that it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to have your children live in a dust-free environment. It's just not. So you can avoid the allergen as much as you can, but you can't get away from it. So the question is, why is this the enemy? So, of course, it's important to know what the enemy is and to try and avoid the enemy as much as you can, while you sort out why it is that your army is firing bullets at something that doesn't actually need to be conquered right now. So boundary issues, on the sort of very sort of simple, for me, the easiest way to spot them is, what do you say yes to that you don't want to do? I'm the queen of that, right? Like, I say yes to, well, not so much anymore, but I used to just say yes to everything, right? And that can be because you don't want to displease people. That could be because you don't want to disappoint anyone. That could be because you don't want to be seen as someone who can't like handle a lot of things. That would be mine. Okay. So, you know, if I didn't have at least like 5 different things running at the same time, like 5 projects of some sort of different whatever, then like if I say no and someone says, oh, well, don't you want to do a 6th one? If I say no, well, what does that say about me? Well, it says that, you know, I can't take the heat, or I'm not as effective or efficient as what I think I am. So we often say yes, not just because we want to people please and we want to avoid rejection, but we have an idea of who we think we are, and therefore we have to protect that identity. So if my identity is I am excellent multitasker, or I'm a super hard worker, I'm not going to say no to anything that's going to make me look like I'm a super hard worker, right? Which means I'm likely going to say yes to all sorts of things that make me feel awful. So that's one of the, what are you saying yes to that you don't want to do? And it's not enough to say, well, I don't want to do this. Again, you ask yourself, why don't you want to do this? Well, I don't want to do this because I'm exhausted. I don't want to do this because it's taking up too much of my time. I don't want to do this because I'm so busy helping everyone that I don't have enough time to help myself. I don't want to do this because I just don't have the bandwidth right now. Right? So okay, so that's the no part, right? So where are you saying yes when you should be saying no? Where are you sending yourself mixed signals? Now, this, in my experience, this happens most often when you have a conflict between what you would love to be doing and what you think you should, ought, must, need to be doing. Okay? So let me think of an example. So women over 50 should be doing, I don't know, depending on which exercise expert you're listening to, should be doing weight training 3 times a week and should be doing less cardiovascular exercise. Okay, but let's imagine I only want to do weights twice a week, but I love walking. So I want to walk 10 kilometers every day. But now the expert has said, I'm not allowed to walk 10 kilometers a day because it's going to create more oxidative stress and it's not good for my hormones, whatever the expert's saying. Can you see there's a conflict? There's a conflict there between what I would love to be doing that's in line with what makes me happy and gives me real joy, like true joy. And I'm not talking about, this doesn't involve anyone else, just me. And what the expert is telling me I should be doing, because if I don't do that, I'm going to get terribly brittle bones, and then I'm not going to be able to hike in any case. So now I do what I must do, and I give up what I love to do. That's a mixed message, because I still love to do it. So it's like a head-heart conflict. So sometimes your heart is longing for one thing. Your head is telling you why you can't, mustn't, shouldn't, oughtn't, needn't do it. And it creates an internal conflict. And now your will starts getting involved in this whole story. And remember, you're the commanding officer of an army that has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of soldiers. And they're all like, what are we doing today? And every day you change the orders. And then when you're not doing what you think you should be doing, you're punishing yourself, and you're telling yourself how bad you are, and you're telling yourself what a useless person you are, and you're telling yourself how you don't deserve happiness, and you're telling yourself that you're not disciplined because you haven't done the weight training or whatever it is that you haven't done. And now when you start beating yourself up, you start abusing your army, and eventually your army goes, screw this, and starts attacking you. And it's at that point that you have an autoimmune disorder. So, Antoinette, go.
Oh, no, I just wanted to add something to that people don't realize that some of their the way they live in their relationships or the work or just in general is actually a very unhealthy coping mechanism based on conditioning or their unconscious stuff playing out. And so if you read Gabor Mate's 2 books, When the Body Says No and The Myth of Normal, he gives one case study after another. That's the benefit in his work, where he looks at people with multiple sclerosis, allergies, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, diabetes, and over again, people are enmeshed in really toxic, unhealthy, codependent relationships, intimate relationships with their husbands that even include abuse, and people are overdoing things. Another example are a couple of people, particularly with melanoma cancer. It's been shown that those are the people that cannot say no. So, and it's not that people, that's how extremely insidious and ingrained it is in us as human beings from our conditioning, actually, that you don't leave a bad marriage or you don't draw boundaries, especially. So why do women, Gabor Mate says, most autoimmune diseases you'll find in women?
80%.
And that's because even 80%, even those of us that are pretty thick, I've never been married, I've run my own business, but there's still this inherent conditioning that we should be the nice ones or the more nurturing ones. And so it's very prolific, this, in our modern society. This is how people live. They do jobs they don't like. I had a business I wanted to leave, but I was too scared to run out of money. I really didn't realize how dysfunctional that was and how it played a very large part in my, where I landed up. So
yeah. And thank you for that, because that was one of the notes that I made, is that sometimes, overrunning your boundaries looks like things that are valued in the world. So mine was work. So, I it's taken me, it's probably only in the last 2 years that I can say, and I'm 40, what am I, 45, listen to me, I'm 54, is that I've actually realized that my life is not about work. My life is about my life, and it includes work. Now, that might sound super obvious, right? It wasn't obvious to me. And so I was just saying to Antoinette, I would go to a workshop in another town and I would be away, and then I'd fly in, I'd catch the red-eye flight on a Monday morning, and by the time, the earliest I could get to work was probably about 9 or 9:30, and I would make sure that my receptionist had my diary full of patients, because I needed to be at work, because it was important, because, that was my career, and I had all sorts of like a whole lot of my identity was tied up in that. And so I used to see patients in the day. I started my coaching job at night. I did all the studying and stuff in the evening and on the weekends, and the workshops and the learning and the da-da-da. And I mean, I was lucky because then I just applied it at work. So I got to have a laboratory of experimentation, which was amazing. But the fact of the matter is that that's what I did. Day after day, year after year after year. And you know what? People would say things like, you are amazing. You've got so much energy. Wow, you get so much done. You're like a machine, as if that's a compliment. All right. And I lapped that stuff up. I was like, yes, I'm a machine. Okay. And so I didn't end up getting an autoimmune disease, right? Because, I mean, luckily there was some sort of balance happening in the rest of my life. I don't really know how that happened. I think it was just grace. But my point is, over-exercising, pushing your body beyond what it's capable of doing without letting it rest, that is a boundary issue. Working too hard, that's a boundary issue. Playing too hard, that's a boundary issue. Drinking too much one night, feeling like hell the next day, and then drinking again the next night. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It sounds like a judgment, but it's a boundary issue. That's why we talk about our rubber arm. People twist our rubber arms. Well, those are all boundary issues. And it's not that easy to just change it. It's not a case of, well, you've got boundary problems, just sort them out. No, because the implications of saying no to yourself. So the implication of me not being such a workhorse is my ego tells me, Loretta, you're so lazy. Oh my God, you're degenerating into you've got no discipline. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you working harder? You should be putting in more hours. Your business is going to go bankrupt. It still does all that. I'm just like, yeah, okay. Here you see, you been there, done that, got the t-shirt on that way, not really that interested in doing it this way. All right. Things like, I remember saying to my husband when I wanted to close my practice, will you still love me if I never make any money again for the rest of my life? Because my husband has a high value on making money and security, right? And he said, he almost, I could see his face was like, Chingo's lady, where does this come from? That was my fear and insecurity. So it takes, there's risk involved in this. There is risk involved because some people are not going to accept you. Some people are going to kick and scream because you've put the boundaries in place. But you know what? The people who love you, and I know that this sounds really trite, but the people who matter and the people who are actually supporting your health and who are rooting for you, they're not the ones who are gonna kick against it. I have a client. She has MS. And one of her boundary issues is she's not married. She has her daughter's she's about my age, right? So her daughter is grown, but she's very connected to her family of origin. And her mom has a hard time, and she has a brother that has a couple of issues, and she has like an open house. Like they just come and go in her house as they please. She works from home. They disturb her work. They eat her food. She deals with all their problems and she sorts all of that out. And so when we started having these conversations around, multiple sclerosis has an autoimmune component, and I was going to tell you, she's lovely and she's a workhorse, right? She has patients. She's a doctor. She works really hard and she really cares about her patients. So she doesn't give herself breaks at work. She hardly takes any time off. She seldom spends any money on herself, and she has an open door policy with everyone in her family. So when we started talking about putting the boundaries in place, I said, Duke, you're going to get a bit of kickback here. So, what she did was, listen, she didn't have to change her whole life. Sometimes you are in a toxic situation and it needs a big shakeup, but very often the little things you do make a big difference. So I said to her, I need you to take a break for breakfast in the morning because she's a late eater, and make sure that you take a lunch break and not do any admin or catch up in your lunch break. I just need you to do those two things. And I need you to just actually be clear with your family about when they can and can't come. And I want you also to, every time they say jump, not to say hi. And weeks have gone by now, and we were having a conversation the other day. I've known her for a long time. I actually know her mother. And she said to me, her mom's coming with her and da-da-da-da. And I was like, oh, you're going to have to caretake. And she said, no, I've had this conversation with my mother. And you know what? She's really taken the me not caretaking her on board. It's been so good for her. And one of her biggest fears, unconsciously, was that she was going to get rejected if she stood up to her family. None of her family have deserted her. They don't like the fact that she doesn't get to run their lives as much as she used to. So it's a little bit less convenient for them. But you know what? Everyone wants to be empowered. As much as we want to be helped, we don't actually want to be rescued. And so the people who really matter are not going to be the people who reject you. So one other thing I wanted to, just take it back to, I was down the rabbit hole now, just taking it back to the disease thing and the body. So your outer boundary is governed energetically by your stomach, spleen, and pancreas, digestion, which is why allergies are so often food related. And your stomach, the organ function energy of the stomach, is about how you process information, physically, food, and mentally, what's going on in your life. So if you're not processing situations in your life, like when you look around and you go, I don't know why people are so mean, for example, and you can't, when you say, I just can't stomach it, I can't bear to watch, I can't stomach cruelty to animals. The reason why we say I can't stomach it is because we are unable mentally to take that big chunk of this is distressing information and break it down and assimilate it and process it. And the spleen and pancreas has got to do with emotions. It's how do we feel our emotions? How do we break the food down so that we can absorb it and make it part of ourselves physically in the body? But on an energetic level is how do we process those thoughts that we've processed? How do we deal with the emotions that those thoughts result in? So when you start looking at it that way, you can see it's not as simple as I suddenly became allergic to shellfish. Well, you ate shellfish your whole life and now suddenly you're allergic to shellfish. It is the energetic breakdown. It's that I think Antoinette used, and it comes from Gabor Mate, the psychic instability, not that you're unstable, but that conflict or the confusion in your psyche that affects the energy, which then affects the organs. And your
Carry on.
I'm just going to do with the internal boundary. And your internal boundary is associated with your lung and large intestine organ function energy. And the emotion, I just want to tell you, the emotion of the one that's associated with the skin is worry and anxiety. The more anxious you get, the less you're able to keep your boundaries in place. The more your boundaries are all over the place, the more anxious you become. All right. And your internal one is associated with your lung and large intestine and organ function energy. And and your lymphatic system is connected to this as well. That's where your white blood cells are made, by the way, your immune system. And the emotion associated with that is sadness and deep grief. So when we are not in touch with who we are, really, what we need, what matters to us, what we need in order to fill our cups. When we're continuously, we're always expressing, we're people pleasing, we're caring, we're over caretaking and all of that, right? Or we're being super rebellious and very obstructive and not, defiantly not taking care of our bodies. What sits underneath that is that deep sadness, because every human is longing to be the most integrated version of themselves, whether we know that or not. And so your body is constantly giving you clues where that integration is not happening, not where you are a bad person, not where you are doing it wrong, just where the integration is not happening. And so when you can start looking at it that way, then disease becomes less something you've got to get rid of, something you've got to fix, and more as a message, a messenger that is giving you the opportunity to make the changes. And so here's the other thing. You can't make the changes overnight. So if it takes you months to sort out your allergy, or if it takes you 2 years to sort out your autoimmune issue and put it into remission, that's also okay. Because some of the changes you have to make are things you have to learn to do. It's like you need to learn new habits so that you can rewire parts of your brain that weren't wired before. You've almost got to like unwire the parts that you've always been doing it this way, and then rewire the parts that are the new way. All the while being kind to yourself in terms of the fact, like trying not to bash yourself too much, trying not to judge yourself too much, and learning a new way of being. I mean, holy hell, you can't do this in 2 days. You probably can't even do this in 2 weeks. You can do it. And so this is why it's really important that if you're looking at it as it's a message, if the message is I've got 20 kilograms on my body that don't need to be there, that's incidentally one of my boundary issues, right? Because I struggle with like wanting to fix everything for everyone. And because I actually need lots of time on my own to recharge, taking me years to work this out. Part of the reason why I have had a weight problem on and off my whole life is because the more weight I have, the bigger I am. The bigger I am, the more sort of intimidating I am, and the more I can hide that delicate little flower who thinks she needs to be this tough machine.
Wow. Yeah,
so here's the thing. I can't lose 20 kilograms overnight, can I? No. It may take me a year to shift those 20 kilograms. And you know what? I might need 27 more insights along the way before the 20 kilograms. So it doesn't mean I don't want to get rid of the 20 kilograms. It doesn't mean that I don't want to, no, I don't want to say get rid of. It doesn't mean that I don't want to create my healthiest, most dynamic body. What it means is I can be grateful for what it's showing me, take the actions that I'm getting from my insights, and move myself towards that healthier version of me.
Wow, so beautifully said. And I think we said this, I don't know which episode, maybe the last one, is that I'm 7-point-something years into this journey. So it's simple, but it's not always easy. But I think what we said was the body knows if we're just taking another step and another step. I think you said we can only take the next step and the next step.
Right.
And the body, I am still having some physical issues, but we always do as human beings. But the body responds well and fast to us just trying, I think. So it's simple, but it's not easy. I think it's simple. Sorry, and
I think it only becomes uneasy. It isn't easy, all right? But the more we need it to happen in a certain time, and the more impatient we get with ourselves, the more we suffer while we're learning it. Okay?
Actually, it is very easy. It's very easy, but the thing is, because it's so hard for many of us to rewire our brains and change the unconscious and uncover the limiting beliefs and the coping mechanisms, it feels very hard.
And also, it can be hard because for some of us, we only start, and this is not an indictment or judgment, but we only start asking those questions when we're seriously ill. Yes. We don't ask those questions when we're 20. We don't ask them when we're 25. And if we get a serious illness when we're 20 and 25, maybe. But, for most of us sort of living in first world kind of conditions, we really often only get faced with serious things as we are, as our strategies and our way of thinking and our way of being and our way of doing is really entrenched because we've had decades of that. So that's another part of why it makes it hard. And the other thing I think that makes it hard is because we're so fearful that we're going to uncover some sort of trauma, if we go back into our childhoods, that we won't be able to cope with. But, if this may help you, I just want to say this. Having to remember or speak about a trauma that was awful cannot be worse than having experienced the traumatic event itself, and you didn't die. That's why you're listening to this conversation.
And Loretta, so there's some journaled research showing that when people speak about their trauma, it has huge physical healing benefits on the body. So, and the other thing is, I think people are scared or avoidant of looking at those parts of themselves that they've disowned, maybe unknowingly, or dislike, or don't think they should have, the shadow parts, because that's been a large part of my journey, is to go, oh, who's this person? I mean, even yesterday I was doing that, like anxiety over the dog barking. It's like, but that is the way, is that extreme self-awareness and self-reflection with compassion to say, okay, well, that's how I handle things. And it's okay because I don't have to be perfect. Perfectionism is another big
100%.
It affects your health a lot, hey? Especially thinking that if you're not perfect, people are going to reject you and they won't love you. So, I'm being authentic. Brené Brown's done lots of work around this. So anyone who doesn't know, go and look it up. It's like, it feels really hard because it comes with rejection probably, but authenticity and vulnerability are the only way for us to be physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy, and they all go together. I don't know if I should add in, but I'll say it very quick. There's a woman called Dr. Peterson who has written a book called Anger, Boundaries, and Safety. And the interesting thing is she says that boundaries are very much an energetic thing. So I just wanted to pull that in because you always talk about the energetics. And I think we draw boundaries about don't come in my house now, or boundaries with how people treat us. But I think we sometimes very unaware of how the energetic boundaries, and we can call it an aura, although that sounds very new agey, can also affect us. Yeah,
100%. And so, I would argue that it's on the energetic level that your boundaries are weak already. So that's why you can start putting habits in place, and you can you can say, I'm not doing this anymore. And you might actually be able to use your will and not do whatever it is for a period of time. And then you fall off the bus. Well, you fall off the bus because your will can only take you so far. And so
Yes.
when you look at, whether you're looking at it, it's your boundaries. And I mean, I don't want anyone that's listening to this to think, oh, well, you know what, I might as well not even start. Because when it seems so big and overwhelming, right? It's like,
Oh,
well,
you're
screw
right.
this. It's too late. I don't want to start. It is when you think about your signs and symptoms as messengers that are there to help you to get to your most authentic self. I want to tell you this.
Yes.
Everybody is attracted to real. So I
Yeah.
might meet someone that I think is very authentic, but then they don't have the same interests as me. It doesn't mean I want to be their best friend, but you know what? I still find them, when I say, I don't mean in a sexual kind of way, I still find them attractive. I can look at them and go, that person is inspiring in their authenticity. And when the more you step into that, the more you give everyone permission to do that in your life. So even if it takes a long time, you know, if it takes me, I don't think I'm ever going to arrive there, but you know, if every year my life gets better and better because my internal life becomes better and better, like hell, that's worth it for me. Now, for some people, it's not worth it. I get that. You don't have to do everything all at once. It's another thing I want to tell you, okay? So you don't have to do everything all at once, but every time you make a choice that you are going to create a different version of something for yourself, and you follow that choice with an action that's in the direction of that choice, no matter how small that action is, you start rewiring your brain. And the more you do that, the more you create a new neural network. And ultimately,
Brilliant.
it's,
And
you
yes,
know,
carry on. Okay. Ultimately, and I think the important thing, because sometimes I don't do it, is to have the intention and the vision, but then you have to take the action.
yeah.
And try and do it more and more from a place that's not will, because I can do major things with willpower. I used to, but now I'm trying to find that balance, which I haven't quite found yet, between having the intention and taking the action, but not with this like bulldozer willpower. But I just want to end maybe by saying, Loretta, that working with somebody who can guide you through this process, I think has a lot of benefits. You get reflections and insights that you don't get, because no matter how far down the path we are, we all still have blind spots, or our ego comes in, or our saboteur comes in and sideswipes us. So working with a good person, like Loretta, or someone you really trust and have researched, it gives you firstly that, and then also like you are going to do the work, if we can call it work, because if you're paying someone and you're showing up once a week or whatever, you're not just going to like fob off like, oh, I can just have that bowl of wine again or whatever. So it definitely has its place. So I think what Loretta and I are going to do next, we've discussed it, and I'm going to be brave enough, authentic enough, and real enough to be Loretta's, to do a holistic health assessment with you. Am I right? Or is that
Sure.
how we're going to handle it?
Yes.
To do with this allergy thing I'm dealing with now, because I have all the insider knowledge, but I'm going to see how Loretta can put some more pieces of the puzzle together, provide another missing link, or how she does it. And I feel vulnerable and a little bit nervous, but I feel excited, because I think if we don't have real life case studies of people going through this, it's just stuff, it's just information, you know.
Yeah.
So
100%. 100%. Well, if you think you're nervous, I'm the one who has to do the assessment.
oh, Loretta. Okay, well, we'll meet you there. I'm sure we'll show up to do this unless we get too scared, but we're quite good at challenging our egos, Loretta and I think. Okay.
Right.
Until next week, stay blessed and look after yourself. Thank you,
Yes, and if you
Loretta.
found this episode useful, please will you share it with your friends? Please share the link. Okay, so the most effective way of doing it is to actually share the link to the episode that you found was useful and send it to them directly. Don't say, hey, go listen to this podcast. Send them the link on WhatsApp so that it's on their phone and all they need to do is click and open it. We'd be very,
and a lot of people don't do podcasts, but that's why we're doing YouTube. So we're on YouTube and then on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple. So Loretta's right. If somebody you trust sends you something, you are going to probably take a listen or a look.
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much. See you next week.
Bye. Yeah, next week.